Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Consciousness Review. I'm Miriam Knight, and our guest today is filmmaker Jerry Alden Deal. He is the writer, producer, and director of Dreams Awake, which is about a family that has lost its communication and cohesion, and about the intense revelations that help them rediscover themselves and reconnect with each other. It's the first film completely written, shot, and edited in the Mount Shasta area, and reflects the mystique of the place. Dreams Awake is Jerry's 17th screenplay, and although he has been in the filmmaking world since the 80s, the film is Jerry's feature directorial debut. Jerry has several other feature film projects in development, including Portal 2012 and Finding Daylight, which will be sequels to Dreams Awake and will complete his projected Awaken trilogy. Well, we certainly look forward to that, and I'm delighted to welcome you, Jerry Alden Deal.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for having me today.
It's our pleasure. Jerry, it's interesting. Everything that you've done in your professional career seemed to have been preparing you for writing and producing your own films. But why did you decide to go down the spiritual path with it?
You mean the original spiritual path, or just with the filmmaking? Because I actually had a spiritual path going way before I got in the filmmaking world. And the filmmaking world seemed like such a natural way to go because of the communication aspects and how you can get that type of message out to a lot of people. And I actually had some out-of-body experiences when I was a young child.
Really?
That actually got me looking spiritually. By the time I was a teenager, I had a number of experiences then. And I just started looking around then. I was actually living in Texas, and I went to the University of Texas at the time in the early 70s. Was a big time for this type of growth. And I moved up to Austin and went to the University of Texas, and there was a lot of those types of things around me. It was a really big revelation. So I just became a searcher really early on and got involved in I'd always been a writer. I'd written short stories since I was a child. And when I went to the University of Texas, I was an English major for the most part and got involved with some student films and over time and was really doing a lot of traditional stuff. And so the spiritual part just kind of came with, as I grew in the film world, the spiritual part just was always there, and I decided I need to explore more that way through filmmaking. So that's kind of how that came together.
That's interesting because you think of filmmakers and artists in general as being much more open to the spiritual dimensions, but you don't see it reflected that much in films. So
yeah, isn't that funny? I always thought that would be true too, but I found a lot of people in the filmmaking world really are not that way.
Huh.
I found it to be kind of the opposite. Don't get me wrong, there are people involved, but it seems a pretty small minority. And in fact, the whole sort of spiritual film thing that's grew up that Stephen Simon and some other people have gotten into seemed a bit late coming to me. I mean, it was great that it's been happening, but I kind of wanted that myself, a little bit of a surprise, because I was always a little shy talking about it, because when I did, people would look at me like I was some kind of weirdo. It was funny. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I totally agree with that. You would think that.
So tell us a bit about what Dreams Awake is, the plot is about.
Well, the plot is about a family that's pretty disconnected as far as a family. It's you could probably say it's kind of a typical of a modern family with all the modern technology that distracts us all and kind of unconnects us from the human element of, and also with nature, how, the real suburban type of life a lot of people live. And so they get thrust into this other world where they're actually on a vacation together and break down outside of a place that is a well-known spiritual place, not Shasta. And they kind of get stuck with each other in trying to figure out what's going on. And of course, the main character, the mother, has a past connection to the mountain unknowingly to her that she rediscovers, and helps her kind of put together her past and deal with that. But there's also current things going on with the family that are going on. That sort of the original screenplay that I wrote was more of an ensemble piece where all four of the family members each had a major thing, but through a number of rewrites, I realized it didn't work. We had to have a really driving force main character, and it's really funny when you write sometimes. The characters start writing their own parts in a way, and the mother, through subsequent drafts, the mother became the stronger character. And when I was writing it, I did not know that would happen. It just came out that way. After about 6 or 7 drafts of the screenplay, it just came, and then I really changed the story, and it revolved around her more than anything else. And so, anyway. So
that's funny. I've heard authors say the same thing, that they...
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's almost, you wonder sometimes, am I writing it really, or is there some kind of channeling thing going on? So, and that really came out. And interestingly enough, I wrote the whole screenplay, the draft, up in Mount Shasta at our place. Stayed up there and whenever sometimes I would come down here and we do a little polish on the script, but I always felt like I need to be up there, and I went through the whole process of doing that, and it just being in the environment, I think, helped the process, kind of being away from the LA sort of Hollywood film environment that I've been around, helped the process of the story telling take place. So I'm glad I really did that part. It really affected how the movie came out, I think.
Huh. Well, you opened with a scene at breakfast that reminded me of a pinball machine, where the family members kind of circle around each other, and if they make contact, they're immediately repelled.
Right.
I really feel like you've struck a deep chord here.
Yeah, it was on purpose to show the disconnectedness of them, that they're just not sitting around a table like people used to be and eating and talking and having some kind of interaction. They're all going different ways, bouncing off each other. Yeah, I've seen that before, so I just felt like I had to set it up that way to show this family just so disconnected. They can't even sit down and really talk and look at each other. So it set up the whole foundation for where the story needed to go to change that in the end, where you see them kind of together at the end of the film.
Yeah, yeah. So what would you say is there an overall theme to Dreams Awake?
Yeah, there is an overall theme. There's several sub-themes kind of, because there's several things going on. I wrote it at several different levels. But for me, the main theme is through the main character of Hope, where she has to find the courage to take really control of responsibility for her own spiritual growth. Because really the way it opens, she's kind of avoiding these things. These things are happening to her, and she doesn't know how, and she gets thrust into it, deeper into it, to where they're actually at the mountain, and she doesn't have a choice but, in a way, to force it. So it's sort of the old Joseph Campbell idea of the journey of the hero, and a theme where she has to go through this and discover what's going on with her, and so she really has to have some kind of ownership of that, of her own spiritual growth, and it feels like in the beginning she doesn't, in a way, have the courage to do that. She has to find the courage to do that. Mm-hmm. So, I think a lot of times people give lip service to that when you look at. I mean, I grew up in a fairly traditional family where we kind of went to church on Sundays every once in a while, but nobody really lived it, or it just didn't seem it didn't seem quite right, and anything didn't fit together where you actually live a spiritual life and think of those types of things day in and day out, and you just don't pay homage to it whenever you want. And then, so to me, it was more about taking responsibility of that and then really trying to live it, which it looks like some people are trying to do more and more when you look at all the alternative spirituality that's going on in the world now.
As a filmmaker, you observe the world quite intently. And I'm hopeful that artists like you are the forerunners of really what is a kind of a movement, a mass movement of awakening. And in fact, that's what you've called your trilogy and your film itself, Dreams Awake, this film. What do you mean by the term Dreams Awake?
Well, it's funny. I really in the beginning, that wasn't the title of the film. I was taken by a quote by Henry David Thoreau, who I like a lot, and he has a quote that you are in your truest life when you are in dreams awake. And it's kind of like I guess you could say the idea is that we live kind of we go through life kind of in a little bit of a trance, like an illusion, and you need to sort of stop, like you said, and have intent, and kind of wake up within this dream to figure out who we really are and what we're really doing here. And I think people just go through the motions. I see it all the time. I've done a fair amount of traveling lately at film festivals and talk to people, and I like to observe them, and it's kind of disheartening sometimes when you just see people that they're just going through this sort of trance-like state. They're just automatons, and you think, wow, if they could just wake up a little bit and sort of like pay attention to what they're really doing. And when I say that to others, I'm not trying to judge them, because I had to look at myself that way. I had to turn out to, is this what I'm doing in my life? And like you said, have that intent and think about that's what I'm doing. So that's what I mean is that what are we really doing here? We just sitting here so we can wake up every morning and have a job and go out in the world and come back and have our family and do all those little things. But what are we really doing? What are we adding? How are we living our life? What spiritually are we taking from this, and how are we adding to it? And so that's kind of like that, having that intent of kind of waking up in the dream that a lot of us seem to be in. So for me, that's what it means. And originally the title was actually Where Heaven and Earth Meet, which is a quote that comes from what people talk about Mount Shasta. Mm-hmm. People locally say when they talk about Mount Shasta, it means where heaven and earth meet. And I use that line in the film, but I decided not to use that title because it sounds a bit religious in a way, and I didn't really want people to think that that's what kind of type of film we were doing. It's really more of an alternative spirituality, mysticism type of thing. So overall, that's pretty much what Dreams Awake is trying to wake up in the dream of life that we seem to be living.
There seems to be a movement afoot to distinguish between religion and spirituality, where the idea is that spirituality is what takes place in your heart rather than what takes place in a building or a community.